Welcome to the Boardroom and Overtime Young CEO Experience presented by Degree. I'm Roz Golden-Wood. I am a sports broadcaster, and I'm so happy to be here with NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. Adam, how are you? Congratulations on completing an unprecedented season in the bubble.
Thank you, Roz. I'm doing well. It's great to be with everybody today.
Absolutely. 2020, you just finished a season in the bubble. But I want to take it all the way back with you, Adam. I want to take it back to when you graduated undergrad at Duke. You were just coming out. What were the career paths that you were considering? And at the time, could you even imagine that one day you would be the commissioner of the NBA?
I'll start with the last question is no. I would have never, ever imagined I'd be the commissioner of the NBA or even honestly imagine that I'd work at the NBA. So my first job coming out of Duke was working for Congress. I was a political science major, and I became a legislative assistant for a congressman from Oregon, of all places, because I had been an intern for him my junior year summer. As I had gotten a fellowship in Washington, an LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson Fellowship, which I did the summer of my junior year, and then his name is Les O'Coin. He's from Portland, Oregon. That's part of his district, and Northwest Oregon, and he hired me then full time to come work for him. I had thought of myself as pre-law, I guess, as an undergrad, but then I ended up putting off law school. I originally thought I was going to go straight to law school, and I wasn't thinking I would. I was thinking that my congressional job would just be a summer internship, but then they offered me a job, so I stayed. I postponed law school, and then I worked in Washington, D.C.
So then how did you find your way into sports from there, from a law path?
So after college and then that congressional internship, I ended up going to law school, went to law school, worked for two different law firms in the summer while I was in law school, but then clerked for a federal district court judge, a woman named Kimball Wood, who's a judge in the Southern District of New York. And then went to work for a large New York law firm called Cravath, Swaine & Moore as a litigator. I would say if somebody had interviewed me at that point in my career, not that anybody did interview me or anyone ever would have thought to interview me, but had they interviewed me at that point in my career, I would have said it's likely that I would be a lawyer for the rest of my life. You know, I went to law school thinking I was going to practice law forever, not as just a credential or something that I thought would be helpful to go into a sports career. And I answer it that way because I get that question all the time. But I then, coming out of law school, I clerked for this judge, and then I went to work for Cravath. And at that point, again, I thought that would be my career trajectory, you know, working hard at a law firm and hopefully becoming a partner in a law firm or wherever that took me. After I had worked at the law firm for about 2 years, I think I began to think that maybe I was interested in something else besides practicing law. And I enjoyed working at the law firm. I still have a lot of friends that I met back then. But that's when I started exploring other opportunities. Still at that point, I wasn't thinking of working in the sports industry. And something I tell, especially younger people who are asking me about my career path all the time, there wasn't such thing as the internet back then. So you couldn't Google NBA or look at NBA.com and look at career opportunities or even understand what was available. I mean, you could go to the library and get a book on careers in sports, but people didn't really define jobs in sports that way back then. And I was fortunate. I ended up meeting David Stern, of course, then the commissioner of the NBA. So this is roughly 1992, early 1992. And David was someone who had worked at the same law firm as my father. And I didn't know David, but I wrote him a letter, old-fashioned letter saying, and I wasn't thinking at that point that I would end up working in sports. I thought here was someone who'd made a transition. He had been a partner at the same law firm where my dad worked and had left that career to work in a business industry other than law. I wasn't thinking so much specifically sports, but I wrote him a letter and said, you know, do you have any advice for me? And we spoke on the phone once, and then I remember, I think it must have been several months later, his assistant called me and said, Commissioner Stern would like to meet with you if you're available. And I ended up going to his office and meeting with him. And long story short, his idea was to hire me as his assistant. He was looking for someone who was a lawyer who didn't necessarily want to practice law anymore. So he ended up hiring me. My first position at the NBA was special assistant to the commissioner. That was my title, but I was outside of the legal department. I was not a lawyer at the NBA. And ultimately, as commissioner, I became commissioner roughly 22 years or so later, and commissioner was my fifth job at the NBA. So, and again, if someone had interviewed me back then when I had become special assistant to the commissioner, and no one did, no one asked me, but if somebody said, now where's your career path? I would have said at the time, I'm going to learn from David Stern. I'm so fortunate to have this job. I'll get a better sense of I wouldn't have said the sports industry at that moment, but business, and then I'll move on to something else. I would never have predicted I would be at the NBA now I'm in my 28th year at the NBA, and I certainly wouldn't have predicted that I would become commissioner.
So you used your networks, you reached out to somebody in a higher position. It was David Stern. You gave it a shot. He gave you a shot. And you created not only a job for yourself, but a very valuable mentor in David Stern. And may he rest in peace. I know the NBA family has lost many loved ones this year, David Stern as well. So, I want to talk about just the mentorship aspect of it. What did you learn from David Stern?
Well, to your earlier point about using your network, and I know, again, purpose of this forum today is, again, about using networks and expanding sort of your horizons, that David was one of many people I contacted. And most of them in those days, they were true cold calls in that you couldn't. And again, I think for young people today, as you know, there's so much more information available to you. If you wanted to work at the NBA, there's not much you couldn't learn about, whether it was through official site like NBA.com or unofficial, job forums, et cetera. You really can have a good sense of what's going on there. I think for me at the time, it was, typing a letter, putting a stamp on the envelope, sending it to David Stern saying, you don't know me, but you used to work with my father, would you ever happen to have time, to meet with me? And so I got really lucky. And that's just happenstance, because I know now, when even for me at this moment, don't write me any letters. I'm pretty busy in the moment trying to figure out what to do for next season. I think I caught David at a moment where he had a little bit of time. I know from work, I worked directly for him for 22 years. Most of the time, he didn't happen to have time to necessarily meet with people. It didn't mean he didn't refer them on to others at the NBA, a human resources department or whatever else. But networks are critically important, even just to get more information, to really find out what's going on. And so that's an important part of finding a job, I find. And
absolutely. And what did you learn?
Your question, yeah.
And what did you learn from David Stern?
Well, and what I learned from David, I think, and I learned how to work, honestly, like that. It was a different skill at the law firm I worked at, and I didn't have that same one-to-one mentorship. Again, one thing I learned is that in all aspects of life, good fortune plays a big role. Who knows what I would have ended up doing, and maybe I would have enjoyed some, being a lawyer for the rest of my career or doing something else. But it was a moment in time where David had a lot on his plate. He was looking for somebody to serve in that role as his assistant, and I was available. And what I learned specifically from him, be honest, I would condense it down to hard work. David was an extraordinarily hardworking person. He had all kinds of innate skills. He was a brilliant guy. He was, he had a knack for marketing. He wasn't a trained marketer, and he had a great vision of where the NBA could go. But bottom line, he was always on. He worked 7 days a week. He traveled extensively, and I was fortunate because as an assistant, I became, in essence, his shadow. I went everywhere he went. I sat in every meeting that he was in. I mean, there was almost nothing I was excluded from. I mean, I think maybe because I was a lawyer, we understood there was confidentiality typically that, lawyers are trained in. And so, and I also was very fortunate in that early on in my job, and these things aren't quite the same today. There wasn't a lot of pressure on me early on to produce results. It was more, all right, we can take our time with this. I'd rather you sort of not rush to own something necessarily, but take months and months just understanding the business. So again, I owe so much to David. We became extraordinarily close over the years, but it was just a sort of an immersive experience. And just the last thing I'll say there, these are early days, still roughly early days of the modern NBA in a way, and that it was. So when I got there, and again, pre-internet, pre-NBA TV, pre a lot of the media that we generate now, and one of the things also, just an element I would say of luck for me, is that many people, young people may not be aware, but Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL, had worked at the NBA before he went to the NHL. And Gary oversaw what became known as NBA Entertainment, sort of the production division of the NBA. And when Gary left, which was 6 months or so after I joined the NBA, he left to go to the NHL. I was fortunate in that I was able to then immerse myself in the business aspect of producing television and home videos. And people may remember we had a show called Inside Stuff back in those days. So I got pretty lucky that I got to work on a lot of things that really had a huge influence over my career.
Absolutely. And you said you had, the ability at first to kind of be in his shadow and learn. But, fast forward, it took many, many years of hard work. You finally get promoted into the position of the commissioner of the NBA. How did you go from shadow into your own man as a leader and develop and identify what your voice is as a leader, what your leadership style is, and what your vision was as Adam Silver for the NBA, separate of everything else it had been?
I think that came from, again, the opportunity to learn from not just David, but so many others over the years. I mean, I think of many of the incredible people I was exposed to, whether they were leaders of other companies, people like Bob Iger, the CEO of the Disney company, or Ken Chenault at American Express, or Indra Nooyi at Pepsi. I've always found that if you pay close attention and you're willing to listen and observe others, there are things you can take from them, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't all have to be original. I mean, I think there's analogies with ball players who grow up endlessly watching, the great moves of other basketball players, or even, young players when they come into the league, emulate what they see from vets. Now, maybe they ultimately add a twist to it that becomes their own, but they're not afraid to sort of acknowledge that they're able to take from their elders or from others who've come before them. And I think that was probably my best skill, was willingness to listen, watch, observe, and absorb what others had to offer. And I think that in addition to David, there was, when I first joined the league, the deputy commissioner was someone named Russ Granick. He no longer works at the league, but he remains a friend today. I learned a lot from Russ and other colleagues at the league. And then there were terrific team owners, people like Jerry Buss, the late Jerry Buss, of course, his daughter Jeannie is now the governor of the Lakers. But I mean, Jerry, along with David, invented much of the modern NBA, the courtside seats, the dancers, things that people take for granted now, but weren't part of the professional sports experience. And, I just think of Jerry Colangelo, who was then the governor of the Phoenix Suns. I mean, he went on to run USA Basketball in the Hall of Fame. I mean, just, again, a different style from David's. And also, honestly, there were things David did back then, his approach, that I decided would not have been authentic to me. And maybe, that.
So what's authentic to you? What is your specific style that you figured out?
Maybe a more collaborative style. that recognizing the importance of relationships and partnerships, again, willingness to listen, work with people, be very transparent. I mean, part of it, I think, isn't just the difference between David and me, although there are real differences. It's also a huge difference between when he became commissioner in the 80s and then going into the 90s in 2020. There's just a different expectation. It's related, I think, to what I was saying earlier about the ability to go on the internet. There's just generally an expectation that businesses are going to be more transparent. And if you're not, at your peril, even with your own employees. There's not many closed door meetings, so to speak, at least at the same level. Of course, there are things that are confidential, but even people, junior employees at the NBA, there's an expectation that they're going to understand what's going on and why we made certain decisions. By the way, it doesn't mean it turns into a democracy, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to agree with everything, but they're owed an explanation. They're owed, all right, here's why we did what we did. If you disagree, I'll listen to you, and maybe I'll change my mind, maybe I won't. But it's not sort of the business equivalent of shut up and dribble. You know what I mean?
Adam, I'm going to try and squeeze a few in here because we get closer and closer to opening it up to questions from the audience. So, and as our time runs down, I want to know more about how things have, you mentioned when you were starting, there wasn't like Google, there wasn't like the internet the way it is now. And now your job is so big. There's so much you have to keep track of. How do you keep track of all the latest trends in technology, in business, in culture, globally, worldwide, global markets? Is it like, do you spend an hour each morning reading, or do you have like someone on staff who gives you briefings? Do you have a burner TikTok account? Like how are you keeping up?
Are you noticing the bags under my eyes? Is that your point? I would say I barely keep up. And I'm not ashamed to admit I work incredibly hard, and keeping up is difficult because, especially for an industry like sports or business like the NBA's, everything seemingly is relevant. I mean, I'd say like I'm an avid newspaper reader. I mean, still hard copy newspaper most of the time if it's available, but I think it's very important to read the New York Times essentially cover to cover. It's not as if it's just sports. Business is relevant. Obviously, politics is relevant. International affairs, the science section on Tuesday. I mean, it's all meaningful to our business. And the Wall Street Journal, but also the New York Post and USA Today. And then to go online, whether it's Bleacher Report, or ESPN, or, the numerous other blogs, or sports content providers. It all, to me, becomes relevant. And to your question about who assists me, I mean, it begins with Mike Bass, who's the head of communications at the NBA. I mean, he does provide a news summary. It's not just for me, but for all the executives at the NBA, and people help him with it. So we get a digest, in essence, in the morning. It says, here's what's going on. Here's what you need to know. But it's a job where I feel like it's never done. And I will say, I've known some people in similar jobs that I have who said, I don't read any of that stuff. I don't want to read the criticism or anything else. I mean, I try not to obsess on it, frankly, but I do try to read it because also you get the benefit. It's a form of market research. I mean, the media is often a proxy for how your fans, how your customers feel. And if we're doing something, the media or representatives of the media are saying, that doesn't make any sense, or taking shots at it. I mean, they may not have the same information I do, so I may not agree with them, but I certainly try to take it into account. So yes, follow, Twitter. Certainly there's an enormous amount of information on Twitter.
You're on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter, but it's a balance.
It's an account.
I wouldn't call it a burner account. I don't post. I only read. So okay. When I do post, it's through the NBA account. But in part, I mean, I would just say that it's sometimes difficult to try to find the balance of not being controlled by social media, not overreacting to it, because I think you have to discern sort of what on there is valuable information as opposed to counting the number of tweets, for example, because who knows how representative that is of how an industry that reaches hundreds of millions of people, so, and we all, you too, as a public figure, I'm sure have to deal with those same issues. Definitely. So I pay attention to it, try not to obsess. on it, but also try to learn from it.
Same here. And I want to finish up too with a big part of your job is also negotiating. Whether that's a CBA, whether that's TV deals, and beyond. What are your best tips, advice on good negotiation techniques, perhaps for people even in our audience who might be negotiating, salary with an employer, or rent with a landlord, or big business deals like yourself?
A few things. One, I'm always surprised how many people who, whether they're colleagues of mine going into a negotiation or people I'm negotiating with, where I don't have a sense that they know what they want. It's sort of, they see their role as only reacting to what it is you ask for or what you say you need. It's sort of the notion, if you need 10, they'll give you 5 sort of notion, and no principled reason for why they want what they want out of the negotiation. So I think that's very important. And I'd say, number 2, and maybe this is particular to what I do, but almost all of my negotiations are with the same parties repeatedly, whether it's television partners, players association, most of the major corporate partners of the league, licensees, traditional marketing partnerships. And therefore my guiding principle is to be fair, that you're never going to win in the long run if there's sort of a gotcha there, that somebody who's across from the table missed something either by accident or they didn't have the same information you do. I always try to put myself in the other person's shoes. And as a good negotiator, think, all right, I not only have to worry about my side, but I should be concerned with their side as well. Because even if somehow through some negotiating savvy or some trick or some lack of diligence on their part, that I get the edge somehow, they're ultimately going to figure that out. And that when, therefore, they're going to lose trust in you, or the next time they come to negotiate with you, because it is these same parties that keep coming back, they're going to be determined, therefore, to get an edge on you because somehow they didn't feel treated fairly. So I think, and we're fortunate in this business. It is, sort of where this interview started, how critically important relationships are. It's often the same people that I'm sitting across from, and I think that trust is critical. And it doesn't mean it's not adversarial sometimes. It doesn't mean that they want something that you're not able to give them, but you got to be direct and honest. And also, again, as I said, put yourself in a position where you don't want to make the other side look bad, and everybody has to come away feeling that was a fair deal.
Yeah, I think that's super sound advice. We're going to go one more with Adam. Super sound advice about relationships, about the trust, about everyone feeling like they're going to win. Here's the hard question for people trying to navigate business, big business deals, trying to make money. It's like a tough line to walk, Adam. Immediately you took the commissioner's job with the NBA. You were tested with the Donald Sterling situation, right? And then just this year, you had China, you had COVID-19, you had Black Lives Matter. What advice do you have for leaders in business about how to navigate the balance between practicing good ethics, keeping strong with core values, and also the need to make money? I mean, it's a hard line to walk. What have you learned?
I've learned that it's critically important that you state your principles up front and that you be completely transparent with people about those principles. And that when you go through the process of making those decisions, and I've always found this to be the case, if you're completely transparent with people, even if at the end of that sort of decision-making tree, you go left and some other people think maybe you should have gone right or made a different decision, at least that transparency allows them to have an understanding of how you were thinking. And even if they disagree at the end, to respect the process you went through. But it's got to be values-based. And to me, making money isn't a value. And I'm not sure even if it's making money for its own sake, that's going to support a business over the long run. Anyway, I think one of the reasons that the NBA is still continuing to thrive after almost 75 years in existence is that it has been a values-based organization. I always say this, the concern for racial equality, for inclusion, for people's individual rights, long preceded me, long preceded David Stern. It's been part of the DNA of this league from the very early days. And so, and that's what, even through difficult times, I think continues to stand up this organization, that people say, all right, they do stand for something. And it doesn't mean we're always going to make the right decision. And that was a little bit my point about the decision tree. In looking back, it's fair game for people to say at that moment you made the wrong decision, or given what we now know. But at least I think you owe that to your employees, you owe that to all your partners, and certainly the fans, that you're going to be completely transparent about why you do what you do.
All right. Thank you so much, Adam, for your transparency and just great answers about the journey so far. We're going to open it up to questions from the audience. My girl, Chloe, is here. What you got, Chloe?
Yes, thank you so much, Roz. That was a great question and great answer, Commissioner Silver. So grab the mic, people. If you have a question, introduce yourself and ask. We'd love to hear from you. And we have a lot of people in here from Canada. I see a lot of people also rep in Michigan. And let's see who we got up first.
Hi. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Great. My name is Laura Vences. I'm a junior currently at Claremont McKenna College. It's really great to be with you all, and thank you so much for sharing your time. I'm really look up to both of your work. Commissioner Silver, I can only imagine how much decision making takes a part of your everyday. So in your time as commissioner, you have led the league through a lot of change, whether that be the 2020, even the 2020 All-Star Game, to social justice initiatives and the bubble. So my question is, throughout your career, what has been your approach to making these big decisions and knowing when and how to take risks?
Sure, it's a great question. You often hear a lot in the workplace about diversity and inclusion, and to me, that's also, diverse set of eyes and ears, and inclusion meaning those people have a seat at the table. And I think what's helped me the most when I made decisions is that, again, at the end of the day, I get it. I'm the CEO, I'm the commissioner, and I have to own the decisions I make. And it doesn't mean that I can say, well, it wasn't really me, it was this panel of people. But at the same time, I have a fantastic group of colleagues and a really terrific group of governors, the team owners who I can rely on. So in some of those situations you just mentioned, whether it's changing the All-Star format or dealing with Donald Sterling or, issues that come up along the way, I have this fantastic sounding board. And often, again, sometimes I have to learn it's something that I continue to focus on every day. I mean, sometimes I'm looking at my computer screen right now, and you guys can't see it, but there's a little Post-it I have on the bottom of my screen that says "Stop talking." And sometimes, like, I find myself in meetings talking over people. It's a bad habit we all have, and or frankly frankly, interrupting people because you think you know what they're about to say. And again, we're all in a hurry sometimes, and nobody's perfect. But again, I think I find that, to take advantage of these resources I have available to me, these incredibly smart people I work with, and also, Roz asked this earlier, like, who else can you rely on? I mean, it might be CEOs from other businesses that we partner with, or governmental leaders who I have access to, who on a confidential basis I can say, how do you see this situation? Or this is what I'm thinking of doing. What do you think? Now, it doesn't, at the end of the day, you have to be your own person and own the decision. But again, I just find that going through that process has been really helpful to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for asking the question.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. Okay, we have time for one more question, so we're going to get one more person in here. So make sure you guys request the mic so we can decide what our final one is. And make sure the question is fire, because this is what we're wrapping up with right here.
Hello there, everyone. Just want to say thank you for taking the time to be with us, Adam Silver, and thank you all to, Overtime for putting this together. So the question I had, right, is So I had a professor here at the University of Texas at Austin by the name of Brian Prez, and he told me he used to work with you at Turner way back when. And
He
he
was the head
said
of marketing.
I'm sorry?
He was the head of marketing.
Yes, sir. Yeah, yeah. So he was my professor, awesome guy, and he told me that you were a visionary even, way back when, and you were talking about all these ideas that you've implemented now in the NBA. So I wanted to ask, what mindsets do you exhibit and wield to, kind of help you be a visionary and a leader and always stay on the cutting edge and stay ahead of the game within the sports industry?
Yeah. Well, thanks for your question. Say hello to your professor for me. And I know we're out of time, so I'll be quick. I would just say this goes back to what I was saying earlier. I don't even consider myself a visionary. I appreciate the question. But to me, it's about constantly learning. Like I see myself as a student. And that it's like that question about how do you get information? There's just not enough time in the day. And I find that so much is relevant to what's happening at the NBA. So much that's happening in politics, in global trade, in media, obviously the internet, 5G, you name it. And it's like I have incredible curiosity about those things. And one thing I learned from David Stern is that the ideas aren't even often apparent in the moment. You may be reading something, it may trigger something, and that you have no idea how it's going to be relevant to what you're doing 6 months or a year later, but there's something sort of in the back of your brain. It's like, oh yeah, this is something they're doing in this other sport or this other industry, and maybe we can apply it to what we're doing in the NBA.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for asking the question.
Adam, I just want to make sure to thank you so much for your time and your insights here with everybody at Young CEO Experience. We appreciate hearing about your journey.
Thanks, Roz, and thank you very much. It's great to be asked, and an honor to be included in your program.
Absolutely. And for everybody watching and who joined us, thank you for pulling up and just kind of sitting here and being a sponge. There's so many gems that Adam shared with us today at the Young CEO Experience presented by Degree. Next up, we have a pep talk sponsored by Degree. And I know my girl Chloe and Larry got y'all covered.